And now on the line is Dualta Roughneen, and Dualta is the head of programs at Plan Ireland. Dualta, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, Dualta, I know that yourselves and Plan Ireland are members of the Irish Emergency Alliance, and in the last few months I've interviewed Caoimhe de Barra from the Alliance, who she's also the CEO of Trócaire, and I also interviewed Jane Ann McKenna from Docus,
Hmm.
and just over a year ago I interviewed your CEO of Plan Ireland, Paul O'Brien. In those interviews we spoke about the growing hunger crisis in the world. Could you tell me, Dualta, how long the current global crisis goes back? And can you tell me how the current crisis compares to other hunger crises we have had in the past?
Sure thing. I suppose the current crisis in facing the Horn of Africa primarily right now, and then the Sahel in West Africa, goes back to the last year. It's been building and building over the last number of months with a really poor performance from the rain across the continent, and we've known kind of 6 months ago that things were going to be getting difficult, but then the conflict in Ukraine occurred as well, and that's really had a knock-on impact on the situation we're looking into now in the next couple of months for a large part of the continent of Africa. With the crisis in the Ukraine, like it's had the knock-on effect on access to food. Like the Ukraine-Russia area is one of the largest suppliers of fertilizer and wheat to the continent of Africa. They're also a major supplier of food to the World Food Programme that usually steps in to help bridge these gaps and these food gaps in places like South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia. And with the lack of availability, it's pushing up prices across the continent, which means even people buying their own food locally as well, the costs are going up. They can afford less, and they're already suffering from, I suppose, the diminished crop growth because of the lack of rains, and the harvest coming up in the next few months as well are looking very, very, very poor. So all of that coming together is nearly like a perfect storm. Your second question: how does it compare to previous? This somewhat cyclical in a lot of respects, in the Horn of Africa in particular, but also in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali along the Sahel belt. Kind of it's connected to the El Nino, La Nina kind of weather changes as well, and there are periods where you anticipate a drought, but it's more severe this time. Probably looking back to 2011, where was the last time we've probably seen anything coming close to the same level, where there was essentially famine in Somalia and kind of some of the southern parts of Ethiopia as well, for a period of time. And we're looking into the same probability now, but probably more people affected because it's affecting both sides of the continent at the same time, both East and West Africa.
Okay, when I interviewed your CEO, Paul O'Brien, just over a year ago, he told me about the three C's that are affecting particularly many poor people in the world today. For the benefit of some of our listeners today, Dulta, who do not know what the term three C's mean, could you tell them what it means?
Well, the crisis is coming along in countries that are affected by climate change. The impacts of climate change are meaning these droughts are lasting longer. Sometimes when rain comes, it comes much heavier and washes away crops that are already on parched soils. So, like the impact of climate change is very significant in these countries, and it exacerbates kind of what would be normal cyclical droughts. And then the second part of this is the impact of conflict in these countries. You look at Ethiopia, there's been very severe conflict across the country, or in Tigray in the north, but also in other regions in the country as well, which means people aren't able to access the land to grow their food. Um, so, like Ethiopia is just one country. Seen in Mali as well. It's a very difficult situation in the areas of Timbuktu, a place where many of us here in Ireland would have heard that name when we were kids. It's in the north of the country, and it's already kind of suffering from the spread of desertification, but the conflict between the populations in the Agadez region and I suppose the central government in Mali, similarly in Burkina Faso, I've seen the same challenges as well around conflict. And then the last one, the last C that everybody knows is, the coronavirus. And the impact of coronavirus isn't as direct in Africa as it is in other places, but it's the knock-on socioeconomic impacts that have come with the coronavirus that have seen kind of inflation in some of the western and northern countries, which has the knock-on effect on food prices in West Africa as well. And the challenges, of course, for people that are being affected by coronavirus are direct, but also in Africa, the indirect impacts are more severe there than they are here. We've got kind of safety net coping mechanisms here in Ireland and across Europe, where we've got social protection systems that are functioning and very, very sophisticated. We've got a very strong tax base that the government is able to step in temporarily, to buttress people's falling income, or when they've had to furlough jobs across the country. In somewhere like Somalia, that doesn't exist. Those processes and those benefits are not in place as well. So when jobs dry up, people don't have other alternatives to fall back on, and really are reduced to subsistence living.
Okay, do you personally do much travelling to other countries where Plan works in on the front line, Dualta?
It varies. Now, the last couple of years have been very difficult in terms of travel, just because of the coronavirus. It meant there's a lot of restrictions. Where you can travel, countries kind of closing their borders and making travel much more difficult. And similarly, internally in the organisation, we were very cognizant that we didn't want to be contributing to the spread of the virus as well, and we're springing it from places where, say, the virus would be highly endemic into countries where they've got much lower caseloads. We didn't want to be contributing to that. But previously, I've been working with Plan for over 10 years now. My first actual emergency response was in Ethiopia for the 2011 food crisis, where I was there to support the team. And then after that, in 2012, I was in Niger and Burkina Faso for the follow-on drought response that we had in West Africa. And since then, like, most of my travel has been different emergencies that happened, like the earthquake in Nepal and the typhoon in the Philippines. And I was in Sierra Leone for the Ebola outbreak in 2014, 2015 as well, setting up our response there. So the travel had been fairly frequent. The last couple of years, it's been much reduced.
Yeah, you have a lot of experience. Okay, I read recently that most of the people in the world today who are kind of impacted by the global food crisis are the biggest cause of them being in this situation is because of conflict. Is that true, is it?
Conflict is a very significant contributing factor. Like I was saying earlier, most of the countries that are suffering the looming food shortages and the looming hunger are affected by conflict. It's, you look at South Sudan, perpetually impacted by conflict, quite often quite localized conflict in arguments locally over land, over access to grazing rights, fighting over cattle in Ethiopia, next door neighbouring country. The last 2 years have been really difficult for the country. The main conflict is kind of in the Tigray northern region of Ethiopia, but there's been other outbreaks of fighting in different parts of the country as well, which has resulted in a lot of displacement within the country. But what happens when you have the conflict is people get displaced from their land and from access to their own food, but also means then that even other people aren't able to just simply do the basics of tilling and planting and harvesting, because conflict makes it impossible and too dangerous to happen.
Okay, Joseph, can you tell me, like, is the atmosphere in your sector, not just in your organisation, but in your sector in Ireland, around the world, kind of a bit depressing at the moment and for the last while because of the global hunger crisis, like? I imagine it is.
I suppose depressing isn't the right word, but it is a fairly bleak outlook at the moment. And sometimes it feels like, we're nearly banging the same drum over and over again, because there are so many external factors that lead to the various situations that are in. Like in our sector, we work in countries that are affected by conflict, and often we have teams who are kind of working on the front line of where war is taking place, and that can be very, very difficult. But then when you see kind of the next level of the secondary impacts of conflict that exacerbate food crisis, it feels that it's nearly, it's a vicious circle that it's very difficult to see a way out of, and it needs a certain amount of patience in some respects, but also trying to remain kind of healthily optimistic that there will be a resolution, that that some things will happen nearly naturally, that you will see an improved harvest, if not this year, next year, in these countries, and that there'll be kind of a reduction in the pressure on people's livelihoods so that they can, build back their own lives. Because the sector, even though you feel like there's an awful lot of charities working overseas, asking for money to respond to these food crises, it's compared to the level of need, it's a drop in the ocean in many respects. Like you're talking of hundreds of millions of people that are facing these different crises across the world, whether it's the number of refugees that are displaced in Africa and the Middle East, due to ongoing conflicts in Syria, in Ethiopia, in South Sudan, in Mali and Burkina Faso. The numbers that, we talk about, refugees arriving in Europe, the numbers are very, very small relative to the numbers of refugees that are, say, in the neighbouring countries of Syria and Lebanon, in Turkey, in Jordan. So it's a hard time working in the sector, but it's, to an extent, it's what we sign up for when we start working in this area. It's not always as idealized as it might be made out. It's nice to be able to do our bit and contribute in some way to alleviating suffering, but it can take its toll as well, I think, if you're constantly dealing with very tragic situations.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be thick-skinned enough to work in the sector full time, go traveling to these countries. But but even before the current global food crisis, and even before COVID, like a lot of people around the world, like traditionally, and even up until now, die every year because of lack of food. That's true, isn't it?
Oh, I mean, it's it's an ongoing issue. Where kind of food availability doesn't always meet the needs of those looking for it, or those needing food. But it's like chronic malnutrition rather than hunger in a normal year, where people would be dying from it. It'd be vulnerable populations like young children as well that are suffering from it's not access to the right amount of food, it's the right types of food as well, and having a balanced, nutritious diet. Being able to get the right foods. It's often like the staple diet would be quite a high starch, high carbohydrates diet, whereas you need the vegetables and the proteins and the vitamins as well, especially when you're a young child.
Yeah, thanks for telling me that. I wasn't very au fait with what the story was about that. Okay, Dualta, what are you and your partner organisations in plan, both in Ireland and around the world, calling for now and over the course of the rest of the year?
I suppose there's a few kind of things we're looking for. It's one is kind of the international commitment as well to, I suppose, to getting the sanctions that are in place on Russia as well, to ensure that they don't impact on countries like Ethiopia, Somalia, and South Sudan, and that the access to food and fertilizer that's needed in those countries is not inhibited by sanctions. Of course, we're looking for a resolution to the conflict in the Ukraine as well, because the Ukraine is nearly a breadbasket in Europe for the supply of, say, wheat to East and Southern Africa as well. So it's hugely important. And then, looking to the governments as well to ensure that they're both responding to the Ukraine crisis, but also not taking their eyes off the impending food crisis that's affecting Africa as well, and going to be very severe in the next few months as well. So they're able to dedicate the resources necessary to I suppose to support the humanitarian needs of both conflict and climate affected populations.
Okay, Dylan, let's come towards the end of the interview. Along with giving financial donations, are there any other ways our listeners, and to say on their family listening, can support your work in Plan Ireland?
Listen, the financial donations are great and very much appreciated. You know, if people have the opportunity to go to plan.ie and donate, it's very much. But also, you know, if you're talking to your local politicians to ensure that the support to Ireland's overseas aid programme, Irish Aid, is continually given the support needed by cross-party parliamentarians as well. Like it's a very challenging time. There's a lot of pressure on the overseas aid budget, and the more political commitment there is to it, you know, the more support Ireland can give as a country to people affected by crisis.
And I believe you have a Plan Ireland, you have a ball coming up in a few months, don't you?
We do, yeah. In October, I think, isn't it? The bowl is kind of a flagship event to bring some of our supporters together, you know, to celebrate the work the plan has been doing over the last year. It's a long time now since we've had a bowl due to coronavirus, not being able to bring people together face to face. But you know, there'll be tables and seats for sale for that ball. But really, it is, you know, a coming together of people who know us as an organisation and support us to, you know, to talk about the work that we're doing and to celebrate some of that as well.
Okay.